Today's sponsor is Datadog, a real-time monitoring platform that unifies metrics, logs, and distributed traces from your cloud containers and orchestration software. Datadog's container-centric monitoring features allow you to track the health and performance of your dynamic container environment. The Container Map provides a bird's-eye view of your container fleet, and the Live Container View searches, groups, and filters your containers with any criteria, like tags, pods, or workspaces. To start monitoring your container clusters, sign up for a free trial today, and Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. Visit datadog.com/container-cloudcast to get started. That's datadog.com/container-cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And this is Aaron for Cloud News of the Week. And for those of you that listened last week, I'm recovering from COVID, doing pretty well, but I have a bit of a cough still. So trying to get through this as quickly as possible and with minimal coughs and minimal edits as well. So I'm going to jump right into Cloud News of the Week. For our first article, we covered it previously and even did a podcast specifically about it. Broadcom purchase of VMware recently. Well, there's been a development. Tom Krause, who was the president over at Broadcom, Broadcom Software, overseeing the VMware acquisition. Well, he left the company. And he left, it wasn't immediately clear where, but he's going to become the CEO of Citrix and Tibco. And if you're not familiar with that, private equity firms bought both Citrix and Tibco and are trying to bring them together, and completely admit, bit of a head scratcher to a lot of folks as to how they're going to make that work in a larger, bigger picture. But apparently Tom's going to be the guy. And in an analysis of them, because there's always like, oh, what kind of CEO is it? Is it like a tech CEO, or what kind of background do they have? Tom's big asset, according to the article that we linked out, he's more of a financial CEO. And so it's going to be his job to make the numbers work on something like this. So it remains to be seen. What does this mean for Citrix and Tibco and whatever that company is going to be called, if they do indeed rename it? And what's going to happen for VMware and Broadcom? This certainly throws a pretty big wrench into the plans as well. And for our second article, the Register is just reported AWS is now renting out a new Mac instance types. This is based off of the M1 chip. And a couple interesting things to note here. Now, of course, by the name, it's the second instance type. They've named it, the second generation of it. The first one, of course, being the Intel generation. Now, two interesting things here that I see in this article. Number one, the pricing. The pricing of the M1 instance, the newer instance, is 65 cents, which is almost half the cost of the Intel instances. So, bit of a head scratcher as to why the newer instance is half the cost of the older instance. A lot of folks are saying, well, it might be electrical requirements and how much power consumption are in those chips. Could be a bunch of other factors as well. But it almost becomes a no-brainer to move to those instances. And another one as well to note is the operating system that is available. It is only one operating system, and it is over a year old. So if you're looking for latest and greatest operating system for this, then this isn't the one that you want as well. So with those caveats, though, it's interesting to see they're doing it. And they basically took a bunch of Mac Minis in a data center somewhere, and now you can consume those if you want. For our third article, this is more of rumors and speculation, but Oracle is considering, or did consider, doing over $1 billion in cuts. This hit this week. And according to the link, as they completed the Cerner acquisition, of course, a really big acquisition for them. Well, they probably also needed to do some cuts. And those cuts came in many different forms, but they were actually mainly, it looks like they're mainly coming from the SaaS side of the business. Now, there's been some theories as to why. Maybe it's related to some of the other SaaS properties they have already in the portfolio. Maybe it's related to TikTok and bringing TikTok over and the success or not success of that platform, depending on how you look at that, or the migration to that platform. So no one knows exactly if this is true. No one knows exactly if this is coming, but it certainly is impactful, because in order to cut $1 billion, it could be up to upwards of thousands in a layoff. So certainly wish everyone over there the best, and good luck to everyone. And we hope everyone comes out the other side of that safe and secure. And with that, I'm going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week. Coming up right after the break, we're going to be talking about WebAssembly PaaS.
Today's show is sponsored by Lightstep Incident Response. Built on the ServiceNow platform, used by over 6,000 companies worldwide. Lightstep Incident Response allows you to scale your incident response team without adding to your monthly bill. With intelligent on-call scheduling and escalations, you get the full context of your service health. Lightstep Incident Response immediately pinpoints issues and uses machine learning to send group text, reducing your time to respond. And you can seamlessly orchestrate alert and incident triage with on-call scheduling across Slack, Teams, Zoom, desktop, and mobile. So get started today with a free 30-day trial of Lightstep Incident Response by visiting lightstep.com/cloudcast. That's lightstep.com/cloudcast. And get a free t-shirt after your first alert or incident. And we're back. And, folks, one of the topics that we've covered, I feel like for years and years on this show, has been, how it's been this thing where, there's been a thread for, probably at least a decade now, which is we would love to make it easier for developers to build applications. We would love to find a way to sort of hide a lot of the stuff that they don't want to deal with: infrastructure, security, scaling, all that sort of stuff. And we've gone through various iterations of calling this platform as a service. And I think, we've looked at, what's been successful with those, where have things struggled. And then in parallel, we've been watching this trend of different ways in which we enable compute to sort of help those things for developers. And so, we've all sort of lived through virtual machines, we've lived through containers, and there's been this, kind of thing that keeps coming back around, which is, is there going to be something smaller than a container, right? Some sort of smaller unit, more finite unit. And also, is there going to be another generation of people trying to figure out this thing that we've called PaaS and other stuff in the past to make things easier for developers? And I think we've hit another one of those inflection points in which, there's some technology that's come along that's interesting on the developer side. And, there's been a lot of lessons that we've learned on the platform as a service side. So today we're going to kind of talk about this new intersection between WebAssembly as this new way of not only building applications, but the thing that developers care about, and trying to make that simple. And we're going to dig into that with a new company. You guys all know we love to talk to new companies, fresh ideas. We're going to talk to Matt Butcher, who is co-founder and CEO of Fermyon. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brian.
I'm going to get the name right. It's a new name. We were talking about it earlier. Welcome to the show. Let's talk a little bit about your background, and then we'll talk about Fermyon, not only the name, the company, all those sort of things. You've got a really rich background of having built some pretty amazing things, and some things that have been foundational for a lot of where we are. Give folks a sense of your background, and then obviously tell us what's driven you to start Fermyon.
Yeah, sure. Probably the easiest place to start on background was sort of how I got into cloud in the first place. I was in the Drupal world, did a bunch of Drupal development, joined HP Cloud as HP Cloud was sort of emerging based on OpenStack as what they, as one of the cloud contenders for the virtual machine space.
Yep.
I came in originally to do website development, got a first taste of OpenStack, and was like, my mind was blown. Right, I'm like, oh, this is amazing. This is going to change the way we do everything. And I kind of ditched the Drupal thing, pivoted in there, and started working on OpenStack. I ended up working on their own version of Cloud Foundry there, which was a platform as a service offering. Did that for quite a while. HP Cloud didn't quite get the escape velocity I was hoping for. And so when I left there, I ended up doing another small startup, ended up at Google in IoT at Google, and then went from there going, I don't think I can do this big company thing anymore. I went from there to a small startup in Boulder called Deis. And Deis was doing cool stuff, right? At the time I joined, platform as a service was their thing. They believed that containers were the future. I had kind of gotten my first taste of containers just months before. And again, like seeing the virtual machine thing take off, I was like, containers, this is going to be great. I love this technology. Containers were a beautifully and elegantly structured technology. I just instantly fell in love. Started working at Deis on Deis Workflow, which was their our platform as a service offering. And as we got looking closer and closer at the infrastructure layer of how we wanted to do the deployments for a platform as a service, we started looking at Fleet and Mesos and Docker Swarm, but this newcomer on the field, Kubernetes, looked pretty interesting. So I kind of broke off from the main group, and a couple of us started experimenting with whether we could run our platform as a service on top of Kubernetes. Eventually, we decided yes. The entire company sort of pivoted. Funny story, on the day that we pivoted, they asked me to give a presentation to the company saying, hey, this is what Kubernetes is. And so I came up with this silly little slideshow called the Children's Illustrated Guide to Kubernetes with my kids' stuffed animals all posed out there. And that's how we kind of introduced the company to it. Now the marketing kind of took the Illustrated Kubernetes, Children's Guide to Kubernetes, and made it into a thing. And so, if you grab a copy of that somewhere, the whole thing came out of me trying to figure out a good way to explain to people after lunch what Kubernetes was.
That's great. Yeah. Now, if you've been around the Kubernetes community, you've known that it's been front and center at KubeCon and CNCF, and yeah, that's awesome.
It was one of the most fun things I've ever gotten to do. And one of those cases where, again, I was thinking when I did it, this is going to be a thing to show a couple of people after lunch. It was an all company meeting. Marketing was there. Finance was there. I knew I had to do a good job of sort of articulating why we were excited about this. And it was just silly and lighthearted. And to see it have kind of snowballed from there was good. Same day is actually the day we invented Helm too, because we had a hackathon at Deis to try to invent something that would demonstrate why Kubernetes was cool. Yep. And a team of three of us kind of did this little silly demo called Kate's Place that was a package manager for Kubernetes. And after the whole thing was done, Gabe, who is the CTO of Deis, said, hey, I really love this concept, but I don't like the name Kate's Place. So we renamed it Helm. And then that too was a really cool, surprising success story in the Kubernetes world. Yeah. But then, it wasn't long after that Deis had made a name for itself in the Kubernetes space. The platform as a service was working well. Our auxiliary tools like Helm were really starting to shine. And Microsoft came around and acquired us. And this was an awesome experience. I loved working at Microsoft. It was amazing. They kind of split us in two. Half went and built AKS, which is the Azure Kubernetes service. And the other half of us basically became my team. We did a bunch of container-based research. We continued building Helm. We built a bunch of other CNCF projects like Brigade and Crestlet and OAM, built CNAB. We just all these really cool technologies. And basically the way things were working for our team is that Brendan Burns kind of charged us to go out there and find unanswered problems in the container ecosystem and try and solve them. And so we got to chat with all these great teams at Microsoft, internal teams. We chatted with lots of customers. We'd go to KubeCon and chat with people, and then we'd try and build things that solved these problems. So, and many of them, of course, greater and lesser degrees of success for different projects we did. I'm proud of all of them. Some of them like Brigade that I absolutely love, never got kind of the traction I thought it would, but it was a wonderful project. Others got surprising traction. I still can't believe it in many of these cases. But there were some problems that seemed resistant to us being able to solve with containers. One of them was like instant startup, like really big deal to get instant startup.
Right.
Some of these
like the Knative guys kind of tried to do it, but it wasn't, it's still, you had to warm a lot of things. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And when you think about like the inside Microsoft view, how much does pre-warmed stuff cost?
Right. Right. Exactly.
And even for a small company, right? How much does it cost? It might be negligible when you're dealing with a Microsoft budget, but when you're on a startup budget, of which I'm now acutely aware, it's expensive to keep things pre-warmed.
Right.
So that was one of the things we wanted to solve. We wanted a good, strong security story like containers and virtual machines had. We wanted a good cross-platform, cross-architecture story. And so we had this little list of things we couldn't solve. And we said, all right, it was after an all team meeting, we kind of sat down over drinks and said, all right, let's take a couple wild shots at what technologies out there might be next after containers. How do we achieve things we couldn't achieve with containers? And surprisingly, WebAssembly kind of bubbled up to the top. And the conversation was something like, yeah, but isn't WebAssembly a browser technology, right? I mean, the original intent of WebAssembly was to create a virtual machine and a bytecode format that could execute languages other than JavaScript in the browser. But we started looking at that and going, well, but the model for the browser is exactly the kind of model you'd want for a cloud service, right? It's got to be secure, got to be super fast, got to be cross-platform. And so we start listing these things. So we decided to start experimenting with pulling a WebAssembly runtime and running it in a cloud environment instead of in the browser. Okay. And that was really kind of the intuition that got us started.
Yeah. So it seems like especially for folks who've listened to the show for a while, like it feels like there's some parallels between what you guys are doing and sort of what dotCloud and Solomon Hykes ran into, where they had done the dotCloud thing, they had learned a lot, but maybe it hadn't. You could probably argue that maybe Deis was even more successful than dotCloud at the time, but they realized there were parts of it that were really valuable by itself, or there was just a bunch of learning that came along, and obviously Solomon went on to create Docker and found Docker and all that. So I mean, it feels like there's a little bit of parallel, not exactly, but things build on top of other things and learnings, and you keep pushing along in that direction. That's very cool. So talk to me a little bit. So we've talked briefly about WebAssembly on the show. You kind of in the past you briefly touched on it, but like give me the give me the 101, like you're doing it with the stuffed animals, like you did for Kubernetes for WebAssembly. If that's something like just kind of off the top of your head, like how would you explain this to, maybe not a 5-year-old, but somebody who goes, okay, I don't totally know this stuff, but maybe I've been a Java developer. Like, what is it? What's going on?
I can't do animal voices well. I'm trying to think of what animal would be a good WebAssembly animal. Badger, maybe? I don't know. But yeah, at the core, right? The initial intent when Luke Wagner is a friend of ours, one of the original creators of WebAssembly, and when the team that Luke and others started trying to build this technology, kind of Luke's way of phrasing it was, we wanted to make it possible for other languages to run in the browser, right? But we wanted to do it in a generic way. And so their idea had been to build a compile target where you could take C and you could compile it to this binary format, or you could take Rust and compile it to this binary format, or any number of, Cobalt, Fortran, why not, right? If we can compile them to this standard target that can be executed inside of a browser context, then it would be fairly trivial to connect that running program to the JavaScript API in the browser, and you could start writing a richer kind of application. In particular, if you were trying to do things like, particularly numerically intensive computing that's never really been JavaScript's forte.
Okay.
I asked Luke about this just recently. I said, at the time, were you even considering outside of browser context? Luke works at Fastly now and is working on Fastly Computed Edge, which also uses WebAssembly as its runtime. And he said, yeah, at the time, we were building it specifically for the browser because that was the need we were trying to solve. But we designed it intentionally to be generic. So he wasn't terribly surprised at all to start seeing it applied in places like, Single Store uses it for user-defined functions, and Envoy uses it for proxy plugins, and like us, Fastly uses it for computing. They're in their case on Edge, in our case in the data center. So. Interesting.
And to a certain extent, I mean, and we were talking about this before we started recording, this conceptually gives a developer something like, it's a unit of compute, a packaged way of dealing with something. It is sort of the, logically may end up being sort of the next sort of thing after a container. If you think about, like how would you package stuff, what has to go together, and then the stuff, runtime and all that sort of thing. What you guys have built is sort of positioned as a WebAssembly platform as a service. We've talked about platform as a service on this show for a long time. Everything from Cloud Foundry and Heroku and OpenShift and all the different variations that have come along. What it is a WebAssembly platform as a service? What's it exposing to the developer? And then are there unique things under the covers that didn't that weren't there in other ones where, I have to have the ability to, find services. I have to route things. I have to be able to isolate things and all that. Like, kind of give me the developer's view and the operator's view of what a WebAssembly platform as a service might have to do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And again, like the kind of funny thing is, and not just me, but many of the people on the Fermyon team have kind of been deeply steeped in platform as a service, right? We've worked collectively on, I think, getting close to a half dozen, if not more, different PaaSes. So in a sense, you'll have to forgive us for the fact that platform as a service is like sort of one of the like package managers. We tend to do a lot of those too, right? You just kind of learn the domain and become an expert and then begin to kind of see how to solve certain problems. But in this case, the kind of core thing that we discovered, again, kind of surprising to us, we were watching the serverless trend and trying to figure out, why we were hearing very specific pieces of feedback. We were hearing developers say, writing functions as a service, writing Lambda, writing code this way is delightful. We love it because we open an editor and start solving a problem. We don't open an editor and start writing a bunch of boilerplate so that 2 hours later, after my first unit test have passed, then I can start solving the problem I actually care about. And we're like, okay, that's good. And then, in the same breath, they'd say, but the problem is, and then they began listing problems that they experienced with functions as a service. Hard to debug. Workflow is not particularly developer conducive in a lot of these environments. They felt like APIs were constrained. They felt like they were getting vendor lock-in and all this stuff. And we thought, okay. So the key takeaway here is that a PaaS-y kind of layer with a serverless kind of programming model would be the kind of thing that would delight developers. And so here we are looking at WebAssembly, which has all these amazing performance characteristics, right? Sub 1 millisecond startup time. Contrast that with a container that's still in the seconds or a virtual machine that takes minutes to start up. And we can do all these great things like scaling up to hundreds of thousands and scaling back down to zero nearly instantaneously. But none of those things are things that are going to make a developer say, yeah, it's worth my Friday afternoon to invest in this. What would make a developer's experience or interest peak, right, is being able to say, oh, I can build something in 15 minutes. I can get started in 2 minutes or less, and then I can see if this is feeling right to me, right? And so the combination of this kind of functions as a service approach to development and then this platform as a service experience of being able to deploy something out and check it and see how it works and promote it from dev to stage and stage to prod, that felt like the right combination for us to really meet developers where they are. Right. Hear what they're asking for and be able to say, look, we can deliver on the promise of serverless in a way that I genuinely don't think anybody else has been able to do yet.
Interesting. So, right now, and we talked about this, the company's new, just announced a new round of funding, still growing. A lot of the former Deis team, which is awesome. So you sort of know who you're working with. Two primary open source projects, right? Fermyon project, which is sort of the platform, and then the Spin project. Talk to us about Spin. What is it? How does it work? What's it trying to do?
Yeah, so the Microsoft-y way of talking about developer experience is to talk about an inner loop and an outer loop, where the inner loop is me working on my own stuff, and the outer loop is when we start working together collaboratively as a team. And Spin is our inner loop developer tool, right? Okay. The intention is to say, how do I get my first program, running in our key kind of user story? As a developer, I can get my first application from blinking cursor to running in 2 minutes or less, right? That's what Spin is supposed to do. So, Spin new, the command Spin new will get you a brand new shiny application with all the structure. Depending on the language you choose Rust, you can choose Go. We're adding languages to that by the day. And then after typing spin new and getting that scaffolded program, you type spin build or spin up, and you're instantly kind of running your Fermyon application. And that's about it. That was the kind of developer experience we really wanted to start with. So Spin was the first tool we released specifically because we think it's the most important, right? Okay. We think showing the developer this is how easy it is to use WebAssembly and deploy it into this kind of serverless cloud context. That was we really felt like was the key thing we wanted to do. The platform, kind of oddly enough, right? The platform is less appealing than the developer tool because, developer experience is so streamlined. Then you get to the platform and you're like, okay, I just need a place to deploy this, right? And my expectation, the table stakes for being able to do this are, I've got a web UI, I push it up there, I run it, it's running something in the background. And so in a way, it's sort of less glamorous than the developer tool, but also we just love it. We started using Nomad instead of Kubernetes as our scheduler, and we have just managed to achieve this kind of, it still feels sort of unbelievable to us, the amount of performance we can squeeze out of WebAssembly and how that translates to big cost savings for us as a startup. Again, big deal for us to save our own money and consequently, hopefully save everybody else money too.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I was on the OpenShift team for a while, and I had joined them after they had done it for a long. And that was one of the things Joe Fernandez used to say, who was the original product manager. He said, we had to move to containers from VMs, not necessarily because we wanted to, because it would have cost us a fortune. And sometimes, what's the phrase? Necessity is the
mother of invention.
Mother of invention. So we love talking to companies who sort of have to eat their own dog food or are building on stuff because you have to. One of the questions that always comes up with with opinionated platforms or PaaS platforms is like, what's going to work well in here? What should I avoid? Like, what sort of use cases are you guys, either initially targeting, or are you hearing feedback from people? Like, do you think of it in terms of like WebAssembly kind of good use cases, or are you finding it's, just sort of like a better serverless experience, or how are you thinking about sort of use cases at this point?
Yeah, we realized that it is easier for us to start with opinions.
Okay.
And then loosen the opinions if we're wrong, rather than try and start too broadly and then narrow things down.
Yeah.
So again, that was part of the reasoning behind saying, we're going to go with that functions as a service style API, where the first thing you write is an event handler. It might be to handle an HTTP event or, a message being pushed in on a pub sub queue. But so it very much has that feel where I get an HTTP request and I do whatever I want to do, right? That's my business logic. And I return an HTTP response. That's the entry point into the app. So we started out with that as a pretty strong opinion. We're really kind of targeting microservices and web applications as sort of the first two things we want to make it frictionless for developers to use. And the reason there is because we think that the performance gains and the cost benefits of microservice development this way and web application development this way really, really shine with WebAssembly, right? Because your average microservice in a Kubernetes space, you might be running 5 replicas of the same service all the time, right? And you have to do it that way because you need the redundancy. You need the redundancy on the node level in the cluster. You need the redundancy on the service. You can't afford to start up a brand new instance from scratch when a user's request is waiting, because it's seconds for them to wait.
Yep.
So we went, all right, well, let's target microservices and let's exhibit to people. If you write your microservices this way, we can scale all the way down to 0 when no requests are coming in instantly. And when requests, get blasted in, we can scale up to handle the request to the greatest possible extent that your node pool can handle. So again, with HashiCorp Nomad, we're running our production cluster on 3 T2 small instances in AWS. So to keep this in perspective, right, you have to bump up 2 sizes to large instances before you can start up an empty Kubernetes cluster. We're running our production on 2 sizes down from that. We built this fun game called Finicky Whiskers. It's at finickyWhiskers.com. And Finicky Whiskers is basically a manual load generator. You're playing this game and feeding a cat. And the more you're feeding the cat, the more WebAssembly modules you're starting up on the server, cold starting up, right? And so if you score 100 points in Finicky Whiskers, you've basically started up, executed to completion, and exited 262 plus WebAssembly modules. And the goal of that game was to say, look, it is so fast to be able to scale this way that you're saving money and also getting this great user experience. So that has been just a lot of fun as a way to kind of explain to people microservices, web applications. We can really kind of explore and break some new ground on performance and on cost savings, while at the same time getting that really enjoyable sort of functions as a service programming model that developers have told us repeatedly, hey, we love this. So
yeah. Very, very cool. Yeah, no, I'm literally just putting the link to Finicky Whiskers into the show notes so folks can go take a look and play around with it. And well, this has been cool, Matt. What's obviously it's still fairly early days. What's the best way to engage with your team? What's the best way to, if people want to play around with some of the code? How do they engage with you guys?
Yeah, Fermyon.com is where we update our blog posts, stuff like that. Great place to land on if you want kind of that high level view. Fermyon.dev, DEV, is where you go if you want to get really more engaged in like playing with the source code. All our source code's available on GitHub. We've got a really active Discord channel. And if you just kind of want to follow along from the comfort of your Twitter client, at Fermyon Tech is a great place to go to just kind of see what we're doing and what we're up to. And we try and keep that pretty up to date.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Well, listen, thanks for not only educating us, but also, it's fun for us to talk to companies who, again, are building on the learnings of what we've seen before, right? It's, we never get anything perfectly right, but hopefully the people don't kind of give up. They keep trying stuff. So it's awesome to hear that you guys are back at it and taking it to another level. Cause I know what does James Governor say about every 6 months? He goes, yeah, about every 6 months, somebody decides they want to reinvent the Heroku experience. And it's sort of a joke, but at the same time, you're like, well, there's a reason that's happening because nobody's given up on this idea of I just want to build code and I just want to put it in production and I don't want to deal with stuff. And, like you're saying, there's now opportunities to do it faster and at better scale. And so we're excited to follow what you guys are doing. And thanks for educating us today. We appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, folks, with that, we're going to wrap it up. We want to thank Matt for his time on behalf of Aaron and I. As always, thank you all for listening. We appreciate you not only, hearing when we're talking about the mainstream stuff, but, what we always love to do, talk to new companies, talk about new tech. So with that, thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us grow the community. And we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.